She held his hand through the night, whispering that he would survive. What she didn't know was that he had called her worthless to her face just 48 hours before. And what he didn't know was that the voice keeping him alive was the only person in that building who wasn't trying to let him die. Her name was Zola. Not that anyone in that compound used it. To the household staff coordinator, she was the new one. To the security team, she was badge number 14. And to the man whose wing she cleaned every morning at 6 a.m., she was nothing. Deliberately, consciously nothing. But we'll get to him. Zola had come to Seoul 14 months before this story begins. Not for adventure, not for reinvention. She came because her younger brother's medical bills had outpaced everything her family could carry, and a private staffing agency had offered a contract that paid 3 times what she could earn at home. Live-in domestic work. High-security private residence. Discretion required. She read the contract twice. She signed it. She told herself 6 months. Get in, survive it, get out. 14 months later, she was still there. Every morning, Zola was up before the compound. She moved through those marble hallways the way she'd learned to move through that world. In silence, efficiently, taking up as little space as possible. Not because she was afraid, because she was strategic. She understood, very early, that in a place like that, invisibility was not humiliation. It was armor. She kept a journal in a locked drawer in her quarters. Short entries. Never detailed, never names, just enough to remind herself that she was still a person with an interior life that place had not touched. She made 1 phone call a week to her brother. She kept them short because longer calls meant he'd hear something in her voice she didn't want him to hear. Her mother had collapsed in their kitchen when Zola was 9 years old. Cardiac event. Survivable, but only because Zola had been trained in what to do. Her mother, a community health worker, had made sure all her children knew the basics. Airway. Pulse. Position. Call for help in that order. Zola had done all of it while her younger siblings screamed, and her mother had survived because a 9-year-old girl didn't panic. That was the day Zola learned that panic was a choice, and that the people who didn't make that choice were the ones who kept others alive. On the evening of the 14th, Zola finished her shift at 8:17 p.m. She was in the main corridor, returning cleaning supplies to the storage room, when she heard his voice behind her. You. She turned. Ryu Seojun stood at the far end of the hallway, dressed for a private meeting, perfectly composed, and looking at her the way you look at something that has inconvenienced you by existing. You were in the East Wing during a call I was taking this morning. She had not been. She'd been in the stairwell 1 floor down. But she understood, very quickly, that the truth would not matter here. I was not, sir, she said. Evenly. No defensiveness. I don't want you in my spaces, he said. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Flatly. The way you state a fact. You don't belong in this part of the building. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she lowered her eyes, the way the job required, and said, Understood. She left. She did not cry. She did not go to the staff coordinator to report it. She went to her quarters, wrote 2 lines in her journal that she would not elaborate on, and went to bed. 3 floors above her, in the East Wing, a 31-year-old man's heart was preparing to give out. And every single person who would be called to help him, every aide, every guard, every devoted lieutenant, had already, in one way or another, decided they could live with losing him. Every person except her. And she didn't even like him. That was 3 days ago. Before that night, this is who she was. She was not soft. Let's be clear about that from the beginning. Zola was warm the way iron is warm in sun. Genuine, but unbending. She helped the younger kitchen staff when they were overwhelmed. She noticed things. She remembered things. She didn't panic. Ever. That quality, as it would turn out, was the only reason a man named Ryu Seojun was still breathing. But she didn't know that yet. Ryu Seojun became the head of the Ryu crime family at 26 years old. In most circles, that would be a remarkable fact. In the world he operated in, it was less a promotion and more a sentence. His father had been killed. The family needed a face. Seojun was the oldest son. That was the entire process. He was brilliant, and his family had learned to work around that rather than with it. He was also, by the account of everyone who worked beneath him, exhausting to be near. Cold, controlled, and carrying a specific kind of contempt that had been handed down to him so early, and so completely, that he had never once thought to examine it. He did not like foreign workers in his residence. He had made this known. He tolerated them because the agency his family used was efficient and discreet, and in his world, discretion outweighed preference. But he did not pretend warmth he did not feel, and he did not moderate language he saw no reason to moderate. Zola had been on the receiving end of that twice in 14 months. Once when he felt she had been present in a hallway during a private call. She had not been. She had been around the corner, but he had not cared about the distinction. And once, 3 days before the night everything changed, when he had looked at the work schedule on his coordinator's tablet, seen her name attached to his wing, and said, flatly, to no one in particular, "I don't want her in my space. She doesn't belong here." He had not said it to wound her. That was almost the worst part. He had said it the way someone states a preference for weather. Casually. Completely. Zola had heard it from 2 rooms away. She had stood still for 4 seconds. Then she had continued folding the linens. She did not cry. She did not confront him. She wrote 2 lines in her journal that night, and did not elaborate. Yuna had been selected for him 3 years ago. Not by Seojun, but by the senior family council, his uncle's voice loudest among them. A suitable match. Good lineage. Strategic alliance between 2 allied organizations. She had agreed because refusal would have cost her family their standing, and because Ryu Seojun, at 28, had seemed like a reasonable compromise. Controllable. Distant enough that she could maintain her own life. But controllable men don't survive long in that world. And the man Seojun had become, cold, calculating, impossible to manipulate, was not the man she'd agreed to. When Chong-soo had approached her 18 months into the engagement, the offer was simple. Help facilitate a transition of power, and she would be released from the arrangement with her family's position intact. She would have refused if she'd loved Seojun. She didn't. So she hadn't. What she did not know, what none of the domestic staff knew, was that the waitlist delay was not medical. Someone had flagged his donor matches. Twice. Both times, the flag had been buried in administrative language, and both times, the match had moved to another recipient. Someone in his network was managing his death the way you manage a long-term investment. Slowly, carefully, with patience. On the night of the 14th, Seojun's body stopped waiting for a convenient moment. He collapsed in the East Wing at 11:47 p.m. And the first person to reach him, before the guards, before Kwon, before the on-site physician, was Zola. The woman he had said did not belong there. She heard it before she saw it. A sound difficult to describe. Not a crash, not a cry. An interruption. A weight meeting a floor with a finality that sounds different from accidents. Zola had heard a sound like it once before, as a child, when her mother collapsed in their kitchen. Her body remembered it before her mind caught up. She was in the East Corridor in under 30 seconds. Ryu Seojun was on the floor. Conscious, barely. His breathing was wrong. His color was wrong. His hand, caught on a table edge, bled. He hadn't been able to stop the fall. She knelt first. Called for help second. Her mother had been a community health worker for 22 years. Zola had grown up watching her assess, stabilize, communicate. In that order. She had taken emergency response training twice. Both times for jobs that had never required it. Tonight it was required. She checked his airway. His pulse, present but skipping wrong, told her what she needed to know. She positioned him. She called for help while keeping one hand on his chest, because she had learned that physical contact, pressure, presence, keeps people tethered when they are losing the thread. And then, voice steady, she spoke to him. He opened his eyes. And when he saw who was holding him, his first words, barely formed, barely audible, were, "Get away from me." She did not move. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "And you're not either. Not tonight." The medical team arrived 4 minutes later. Kwon arrived 30 seconds after that, because Kwon always arrived. In 12 years of service to the Ryu family, he had built a network of information sources that ran through every level of the organization. Security reported to him. Household staff reported to him. And he had a standing order with the compound's communication system. Any emergency call from the East Wing routed to him first. The look on his face when he came through the door was not surprise. It was recognition. He saw Seo-jun on the floor, saw the color of his skin, the way his chest was moving, and Zola watched something close behind Kwon's eyes. Something that looked like he'd been waiting for this call for months. How long has he been down? Kwon asked her. Not the medical team. Her. 4 minutes. Pulses present but arrhythmic. He's conscious. Kwon nodded once. Then, to the lead medic. It's his heart. Congenital condition. He's been on a transplant waitlist for 8 months. Get Dr. Lim on the phone now, and tell him we're out of time. Zola went still. 8 months. He'd been dying for 8 months. And no one in the household staff had known. No one had been told. He'd hidden it the way you hide a vulnerability in a building full of people who would use it. She looked down at him. At the man who had told her she didn't belong. Who had been cruel in the specific, casual way that people are cruel when they don't believe you're fully human. And who had been walking through this compound with a failing heart, knowing that weakness could kill him faster than the condition itself. The medical team moved him onto a gurney, and the look on Kwon's face as he watched Zola, calm, positioned correctly, holding the situation together, was something she would not understand until much later. A donor match had been located that same week, but not through standard channels. Kwon had been working a secondary network for 3 months. The kind of network that didn't ask questions if the price was right. The match had come through 72 hours ago. The transplant had already been provisionally scheduled. What Kwon didn't know, what he wouldn't piece together until later, was that someone had been tracking his inquiries. Tonight's collapse wasn't entirely natural. It was accelerated. Surgery was moved to 6 a.m. Seo-jun was prepped and sedated within the hour. Before they took him, he was conscious enough to speak. He looked at the ceiling. He did not look at Zola, who was standing near the corridor doorway, arms at her sides, watching the medical team move around him with the efficient sadness of someone who knows they have done all they can. He did not thank her, but he did not look away from the doorway until they wheeled him through it. Kwon noticed. He said nothing. In fewer than 1% of surgeries, the patient wakes. Paralyzed. Silent. Aware. The patient cannot move. Cannot signal. Cannot open their eyes, or lift a finger, or make any outward indication of consciousness. The anesthetic has paralyzed the body completely. But the mind, in these rare documented cases, remains partially, terribly awake. Processing. Recording. Filing away every sound in the room with the desperate precision of someone who understands, instinctively, that this information matters. Ryu Seo-jun had been under for 40 minutes when the awareness began. He knew, on some level, where he was. The sounds told him, equipment, instructions, the particular silence of a room where everyone is focused. He could feel pressure without pain. He could hear everything. The surgical team was professional and precise. The lead surgeon, Dr. Lim, called instruments by name. Instruments clicked. Monitors beeped. Orders came in steady rhythm. And then, at the edge of that rhythm, Seo-jun heard something else. 2 voices. Low. Near the observation corridor that ran adjacent to the theater. A glass and steel partition, barely soundproofed, designed for medical oversight. They were speaking freely. Not whispered. Not cautious. The kind of conversation people have when they believe the subject can't possibly hear them. The first voice he recognized immediately. It was his uncle's personal aide, a man named Beck, who had been in the Ryu family's service for 11 years and whom Seo-jun had always regarded as furniture. Present. Unremarkable. Beneath analysis. The second voice he did not know. And what they said came to him in fragments, because consciousness under partial anesthesia does not hold linearly. It dips, resurfaces, reaches. The match was flagged again 6 weeks ago. We couldn't hold it a third time without. A dip. Silence. Then, Chong-Su has the votes if the transition happens within the quarter. 90 days is the window. Seojin's mind pushed hard against the sedation. Chong-Su. His uncle. Another dip. She confirmed the latest episode. Gave us the timeline directly. And then a name. A name he had chosen a ring for. He could not react. His hands were immobile. His face was immobile. Somewhere in the room, a monitor tracked his heart rate, and a nurse glanced at it briefly when it spiked, then returned to her task, attributing it to the surgery's progress. Inside, Ryu Seojun was alone with what he now knew. If he survives the procedure, Chong-Su wants the contingency activated within 3 weeks. The pharmacist has already been. The voices stopped. A door opened somewhere. They were gone. And Seojun was left in the dark with the information, unable to move, unable to speak, lying open on a table while a surgical team rebuilt his heart. A heart that people outside this room were already planning to stop again. He held on to the only thing available to him. A voice. Not from the corridor. From closer. From inside the room. Zola had been retained as support staff for the procedure. The lead surgeon had made the call after learning she was the one who had stabilized him. She was not surgical. She assisted in the adjacent prep and monitoring bay, a glass-walled room that fed into the theater. Equipment handoffs. Non-surgical vitals tracking. Sterile instrument counts between phases. During the second phase of the transplant, while the surgical team worked in focused silence, she stood at the monitoring station and watched the screens. His heart rate, oxygen saturation, the new heart beginning to integrate. She didn't plan to speak. But the words came anyway, low, to herself, in the quiet of the monitoring bay, where no one else was present. "I don't know if you can hear this," she said to the monitors. To the numbers that represented a man she didn't like and couldn't let die. "Don't care if you can. But I didn't stabilize you on that floor, so you could quit now." She watched the rhythm on the screen. "Keep fighting." Her voice carried through the intercom system. A channel left open between the bays for coordination. The surgical team didn't react. They were deep in the procedure. But the words fed into the theater. And somewhere under sedation, Ryu Seojun heard them, heard every word. He could not answer her. He could not turn his head or open his eyes or give any indication at all that he was there, that he had heard, that somewhere under the sedation and the open chest and the catastrophic knowledge of everything he had just learned, her voice was the one fixed point. The surgery lasted 6 more hours. He held on to that voice for all of them. He woke at 4:17 in the afternoon. The room came into focus slowly, ceiling light, the particular antiseptic texture of a private medical suite. Kwon was in the chair by the window, and the look on his face when Seojin's eyes opened was the most honest thing Kwon had probably shown in years. Relief. Genuine, unguarded relief. Within the hour, the room filled. His uncle arrived first. Ryu Chong-Su, 61, silver-haired, with the practiced grief of a man who had been preparing a face for this moment. He held Seojin's hand. He said the right things. His voice carried the right tremor. Seojun watched him. He said nothing. He let Chong-Su perform. He kept his face neutral with an effort that cost him more than the surgery had. Yuna came next. His fiancée. She was composed and beautiful, and her eyes were red in a way that could have been tears, or could have been something applied carefully in a mirror. She kissed his forehead. She held his hand. She said she had been so frightened. He said nothing. Kwon, who knew Seojun better than anyone alive, registered the absence of the usual response. The way a man who has always, in his way, been glad to see someone, now simply waited for them to finish. Kwon said nothing, but he noted it the way he noted everything. When the room finally cleared, Seojun asked the question Kwon had been waiting for. "Who stabilized me before the medical team arrived?" "Zola," Kwon said from the doorway. "The housekeeper assigned to your wing." Seojun said nothing for a long moment. "Make her assignment exclusive to my wing." "Already done," Kwon said. The next morning, Zola arrived at his suite door with his post-operative medication on a tray, measured, documented, precisely timed. She set it on the bedside table. Her face showed no expectation. She did not wait for acknowledgement. She had learned, early in her time here, that this was not an environment where acknowledgement was reliable, and she had made her peace with that. You stayed. His voice. Quiet. Flat. She looked at him. It was my job, she said. And she left. He watched the door close. He did not look away from it for a long time. The recovery period was supposed to last 6 weeks. By the end of week 1, the household staff had begun to understand that something had changed, though none of them could have articulated exactly what. It was small things. Ryu Seo-jun, who had never shown interest in any member of his domestic staff beyond the quality of the outcome of their work, had begun to ask questions. Not intrusive questions. Not cruel ones. Just questions. Where was she from? He asked Kwon. What was her contract? Had she requested a transfer at any point? What did she do in her time off? Kwon answered everything and asked nothing in return. Zola was aware of none of this. What she was aware of was that her assignment had changed, that she was now working in closer proximity to a man who made her professionally uneasy, and that the other staff had started looking at her with a particular combination of curiosity and warning that she did not fully understand and did not have the energy to investigate. She kept her interactions with Seo-jun functional. Brief. She brought what was needed. She confirmed what was required. She left. He started talking. Not extensively. He wasn't built for small talk. But he'd begun making observations when she was in the room. The weather. A report. Meal tray flavors delivered with mild displeasure. She responded minimally. Precisely. One morning he asked her directly, "Do you trust anyone in this compound?" She stopped. Looked at him longer than professionalism required. "No," she said. "Including you." He considered this. "That's probably the most intelligent answer anyone's given me in this building." He went back to his report. What neither of them could see clearly, because they were inside it, was the quiet, methodical way Seo-jun had begun to move pieces. He had told no one what he'd heard in that operating theater. Not Kwon. Not yet. Because until he understood the full architecture of what had been built against him, identifying himself as someone who knew was the most dangerous thing he could do. So he performed recovery. He performed weakness. He let Chong-soo visit and gave him nothing to read. He let Yuna hold his hand and looked at the ceiling. And in the hours between those performances, he worked. He fed a piece of false information through Beck. Something small, specific, verifiable. A meeting that didn't exist. A decision he hadn't made. Then he waited to see who reacted. The false information Seo-jun had fed through Beck moved exactly as he'd expected. Within 72 hours, a rival faction, one that had no legitimate reason to know anything about an internal meeting, had repositioned 2 of their people in anticipation of a decision that Seo-jun had never actually made. The pipeline was confirmed. The leak was confirmed. And Beck, who had served the Ryu family for 11 years and been considered furniture, was confirmed. Seo-jun moved against him quietly. No confrontation. No spectacle. Just a very calm conversation with Kwon at 2 in the morning. By the following evening, Beck had been transferred to a secondary property, a family holding 2 hours south, ostensibly for an inventory audit that would take 3 weeks. Mundane. Reasonable. The kind of reassignment that happened twice a year. To anyone watching, it looked like routine rotation. To Beck, isolated from his contacts and under constant supervision, it was a very polite cage. Seo-jun had given him no indication that anything was wrong. Had shaken his hand. Had thanked him for his years of service. Had made the transfer sound like an opportunity. Beck wouldn't realize he'd been neutralized until he tried to send a message and discovered every channel he'd used for 11 years had been, one by one, closed. Yuna noticed. She noticed because Beck had been her secondary contact. The person she used when direct communication with the rival faction was too great a risk. With Beck gone, she had no clean channel. And Seo-jun, who was supposed to be weak and medicated and dependent, had just demonstrated that he was none of those things. She made a decision. She escalated. The message she sent to the rival faction was precise. The housekeeper had become a liability. She was too close to Seojun. She had been present in the operating theater. She may have heard things. She needed to be removed, and it needed to happen before Seojun was fully mobile. Zola received the first indication that something was wrong on a Tuesday. It was not dramatic. That is the thing about genuine threats in environments like that. They do not announce themselves. They appear as a door held open a second too long by someone she didn't recognize. As a question from a staff member who had never shown interest in her schedule. As a piece of her journal, which she kept in a locked drawer, that had clearly been replaced, very carefully, almost perfectly, but not quite at the angle she always left it. Zola sat on the edge of her bed that night and looked at the wall. She wasn't naive. She'd known what she was signing into. She had made calculated peace with that. But calculated peace has a threshold, and someone reading her journal was past it. She began packing. Methodically. No panic. She was going to finish this shift. Collect what pay was owed. And leave. She had the bag half done when Kwon knocked on her door. He did not come in. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bag and said, very evenly, "He'd like to speak with you." "Tell him I'll complete my shift and be gone by the end of the week," she said. "He can find someone else." Kwon was quiet for a moment. "The person who asks someone to look at your journal," he said carefully, "is not going to stop because you've left the building." Zola's hands stilled on the bag. She understood what he was not saying. She went. Seojun was standing when she came in. The first time she'd seen him standing since before the surgery. He looked hollowed out in the way that major surgery leaves a person, but his eyes were the same, completely, unnerving present. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw what she was not saying. "You're packing," he said. "I'm leaving," she said. "I think we both know why. And I think whatever is happening between you and whoever is trying to remove me from this building. That is not my problem to solve." "You're right," he said. "It's not." She waited for the rest. "But leaving doesn't make you safer. It makes you easier." She looked at him. He held the look without flinching. "I heard you," he said. "In the operating room. I heard everything you said." Silence filled the space between them. He told her what mattered. Not everything. He wasn't built for full disclosure. But what she needed to know. The voices. The fragments. What he had understood. What he had confirmed. He told her that she was not a target because of anything she had done. She was a target because she had been present, and because someone had noticed that he had changed the way he moved through a room when she was in it. He said that part without looking at her. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she sat with the information for a long, specific silence. "You've known all of this since the surgery," she said. "Yes. And you said nothing to anyone." "Not until I was certain." "And now you're certain." "Yes." Another silence. "I was cruel to you," he said. "It came out the way facts come from people who've never apologized. Blunt, heavy, accurate. I was cruel to you, and I had no justification that holds. I was taught a specific way to see people who looked like you, and I never questioned it, because I had no reason that was ever given to me to question it. I'm not asking you to forgive that." Zola looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not offering it." He nodded. As if that was the answer he'd expected. As if that was the answer he'd deserved. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I told Kwon to review all the household contracts yesterday. Every foreign worker in this building is underpaid relative to the security risk they carry. That changes this week. And the staff coordinator who uses badge numbers instead of names, he's being transferred." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the window. "I can't fix what I didn't see for 31 years in a single conversation. But I can stop pretending I don't see it now." She didn't say anything. But something in her posture shifted. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. "It's a start," she said. What followed over the next 8 days was the most precise and methodical dismantling Kwon had ever witnessed in 12 years of service to the Ryu family. But it began with a question Seojun asked Zola on the third night after she'd agreed to stay. They were in his suite. She was logging his post-operative vitals, a task the medical staff could have done, but that he'd requested she continue doing. Not because he didn't trust the medical staff. Because he trusted her. "I need to move against my uncle," he said. "Publicly. Through the family council. And I need to do it in a way that doesn't fracture the organization or start a war we can't control." She finished the notation. Set down the tablet. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you see things," he said. "You've been in this building for over a year, and you've watched how it works. You know who defers to whom. Who's afraid of what. You know things the rest of us don't see, because we're too close to it." She considered this. "Your uncle visits you every day," she said. "He brings food from your childhood. He holds your hand. He performs grief." "Yes." "Does he know you know?" "No." "Then let him keep performing," she said. "Let him think the surgery damaged you more than it did. Let him think you're weak and medicated and dependent. And when he feels safe enough to make a mistake, that's when you move." Seo-jun looked at her for a long moment. "You're dangerously good at this," he said. "I've been invisible in this building for 14 months, she said. "You learn things when people think you don't matter." He used her strategy exactly. For 5 more days, he let Chong-soo visit. Let him perform. Let him believe Seo-jun was too diminished to be a threat. And Chong-soo, confident in his own performance, made the mistake Seo-jun had been waiting for. He moved assets too early. Transferred funds in anticipation of a leadership transition that hadn't been announced. Small movements, but documented. Seo-jun moved against him through the family's own internal governance structure, using documentation that Kwon had been gathering without explanation for months. The evidence of the donor list interference. The financial transfers. The repositioning of assets that only made sense if someone had known, in advance, that Seo-jun would not survive the quarter. Ryu Chong-soo was called before the senior family council on a Thursday. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Seo-jun presented the evidence himself. Still recovering, still visibly weakened, but with the kind of precision that left no room for deflection. His uncle had tried to kill him. Not with a gun. Not with violence. With patience. With bureaucracy. With the slow, deliberate management of his death. The council did not vote. In their world, votes implied choice. This was not a choice. This was consequence. Chong-soo did not come out of that room with power. He came out with his life, but only because Seo-jun had been strategic enough to frame the punishment as exile rather than execution. Chong-soo was removed from all family holdings. Removed from the city. Removed from relevance. He would live. But he would live as nothing. And everyone in that room understood that this mercy was not kindness. It was demonstration. Seo-jun had learned to wield power the way his father had. Not through violence, but through certainty. Yuna was gone within 24 hours of the council meeting. Her connection to the rival faction had been documented, her communications reconstructed. There was no confrontation. Seo-jun did not call her. He did not explain. He sent Kwon with a single sentence, and let her understand the rest. The contingency, the pharmacist, the 3-week window, was intercepted and neutralized before it was activated. It was over. Or the first part of it was. Zola's bag was still packed. It had stayed packed through all of it. Through the 8 days, through the council meeting, through the quiet, systematic collapse of everything that had been built against him. She had kept it packed the way you keep an exit visible. Because she was smart. Because she understood that the end of one threat in an environment like that was not the same as safety. And because she had not yet figured out what staying meant. What it would cost her. What it would ask of her that she was not sure she was willing to give. She told him she was leaving on a Sunday morning. Stood in the doorway of his suite with her jacket on, and said it plainly, the way she did everything. He didn't argue. He crossed the room. He set an envelope on the table beside her, and she could tell from the weight of it that it was not thin. "Your full contract payment," he said, "and 6 months' advance salary, transferred to your brother's medical account. Not payment. Not debt. Just," he stopped. "Started again. You don't owe me anything. You never did. What you did in that corridor, in that room, you did because of who you are. Not because of any obligation to me. This is recognition of that." She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "You're going to be a very difficult person for a long time," she said. "You know that?" "Almost certainly," he said. She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands, set it back down. "I came here because my brother was dying, and I had no other options," she said. "I stayed because leaving felt more dangerous than staying, and then because I didn't know what was happening, and then because you told me the truth when telling me the truth could have gotten you killed." She met his eyes. "I'm not staying because I've forgiven you. I haven't. I'm not staying because of the money, though I'm taking it because my brother needs it and I've earned it. I'm staying because in 14 months in this place, you're the first person who looked at who I actually am and decided that mattered more than what you've been taught to see." She took off her jacket. "I don't know if that's wisdom or something I'm going to regret, but I'm not walking away from it yet. From you being forced to see me. From me deciding whether the person you're trying to become is worth my time." She set the jacket on the chair. "So yes, I'm staying. For now." He said nothing. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't diminish what she'd just given him. She went back to work. What neither of them knew, what they could not have known, in the relief of that particular morning, was that the rival faction Una had contacted had not dissolved when she left. They had reorganized. And in their reorganization, they had identified something very specific. The one person in the Ryu compound whose removal would cost Ryu Seojun more than any financial strike, any power play, any move against his family structure. They had watched him change the way he moved through a room. And they had drawn the correct conclusion. The threat to Zola was not over. It had simply found a new address.